Hello everyone, welcome to another Underrated Film Saturday. Apologize, this video has to unfortunately be delayed. I was relatively busy over this week. There might be some delays within the future, but sort of just depending on my schedule, I kind of have to work a lot of things into it, and I want to make sure that I'm putting some thought behind a lot of what I do, so I don't want to try to catch up when I can't, but I can definitely catch up by now. So without further ado, for this particular underrated film Saturday, I thought it'd be interesting to explore the film October Sky. Now this is something that you may or may not have heard of. It's a fairly, I think when it initially came out, it was fairly unknown. I'm sure it's probably gained some popularity after it was presented over years and years, but I don't think that, in particular, a lot of these kinds of films are really explored all too much. And it's really nice to see these kinds of films being sort of put to the forefront, considering the fact that, in particular, this one, as a lot of the films that are within this sort of category, try to base things off of real events and try to focus in on stories that actually were part of sort of real life. So I think that that's something that filmmaking has tried to utilize over the years, but I think hasn't gained as much exposure as some other genres. And this film, October Sky, is in particular a biographical film of I guess you could call him a rocketeer, named Homer H. Hickman, who is played by Jake Gyllenhaal. And basically, this takes place with around the 1950s, where he basically plays a coal miner's son, who eventually wants to become a rocketeer for NASA. And he gets inspired to want to be a rocketeer for NASA when he hears about the Sputnik 1 launch. And you sort of see throughout the film as he tries to sort of create a rocket, and how some of his classmates and a teacher also try to sort of help him in that endeavor. And despite him wanting this particular goal for himself, his father is really against it, because as a coal miner, his father really wants his son, Homer, to take up the mantle for the family and become sort of a coal miner. And you can sort of tell that in the way in which the story takes place, it's a very small kind of town, there's not a huge amount of opportunity, and a lot of families really did focus on trying to do what was sort of common and sort of important to sort of the town, and in this case being coal. So and what I think really works well with this film, and why I think it is a lot better than a lot of other films that try to focus on the aspect of the guy, the conflict of, somebody wanting to do something and then a family member being against it. What works really well is that you really do see that there's not really a villain here. The dad is not in the 100% of the wrong. He just has a very different perspective and outlook on life and different expectations that he puts on his family. And those expectations don't translate to Homer all that well. And you really do see why Homer really wants to kind of, escape, at least, because again, a lot of, at least primarily the way in which the town is sort of constructed, again, there's not a huge amount of opportunity. There's kind of, this very niche element to the town that seems very isolated from everything else. So you can kind of see the kind of escapism that he wants to experience. So you really do see both perspectives here. It's not like the dad is a bad guy. He just kind of has a sort of misunderstanding with his son, as far as the expectations are concerned, and it's kind of it's easy to identify with both characters, and I think that ultimately works. And is the dad maybe a little bit too harsh at times? Yes, but I can sort of see where the dad is coming from, considering the fact that, you know, he has grown up in that coal miner sort of lifestyle, and how that town within and of itself sort of fosters that kind of work. And uh, I think also another thing that ultimately works well with this film's advantage, and what a lot of films um, don't really focus on, is sort of the inspirational uh, aspect of trying to sort of, you know, accomplish something, and, you know, really having sort of that uplifting message. Because overall, even though there is sort of discouragement at times, and even though Homer is forced into doing things that he ultimately doesn't want to do, his ultimate passion is sort of seen through, and a lot of that is through sort of the support and and eventually the way in which he's able to finally relate to his dad kind of comes around eventually, and you sort of see how that ends up occurring if you choose to watch the film. And I think um, that's ultimately the reason that this film actually really works well, and is actually very enjoyable to watch. It just has a certain amount of down to earthness to it, where there's not a huge spectacle. It's not like these people are like, you know, somewhere out in outer space, and, you know, it's like they have to deal with all of these uh, complicated circumstances. It's fairly narrowed down to, you know, just the kind of uh, interesting family dynamic, and then also um, the sort of passion that is behind, you know, trying to explore space and sort of be that rocketeer, so to speak. Um, and I think, again, I think the genre, if in and of itself, the biographical sort of approach, is not really as utilized of a genre, and I think that's why there's probably a huge amount of kind of discouragement, and from people not really getting invested or interested in this particular film. Because I think oftentimes we think of biographical things as kind of just boring and slow. But this one was fairly, I think, upbeat overall, and I didn't at least feel a lot of, I felt like there was enough going on to where I was engaged, and at the same time, I thought it was very, again, it felt very down to earth. It had this approach to it to where I can sort of see these people sort of existing within real life. Um, and also the fact too, again, it did not make a whole lot of money when it came out. It wasn't really that thoroughly explored, and I don't think a lot of people remember Jake Gyllenhaal from this particular film all too much. So um, I think if you are interested, even into science, if you like science, I mean, this is a sort of a part of science history, really, where there was this kid, Homer, who managed to pull through and get inspired to make something for science. Um, you know, if you're into sort of understanding the kinds of things that at least were going on within the 1950s, and again, a lot of that was space exploration, um, then I think, again, you will find this film rather enjoyable as well. 50s, 60s. I almost want to say this starts in the 50s, but it's almost hard to tell sometimes. Uh, but yeah, thank you though so much for watching. I think that's really ultimately all I can say about this film. But if again there are any questions, comments, concerns, be more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year, and I hope to see you all in the next video.